She thought she'd found true love in the arms of her husband's own brother. 2 months later, her lifeless body was pulled from a creek, her skull shattered, her story silenced. But the real tragedy? The only 2 men who could have done it were the ones she loved most. This isn't just a crime of passion. It's the unraveling of a family, the breaking of trust, and the ultimate betrayal. This is the story of Emily Parker, near Maplewood, Ohio. A place where the air smells of cut grass in summer, where people wave to each other even if they've never met, and where a stranger walking down the wrong street will be noticed within minutes. In towns like this, lives become stories. Stories whispered in grocery store aisles, passed over coffee counters, dissected at church luncheons. And for years, the story of Emily and Michael Parker was the kind everyone wanted to tell. Emily Parker was 32. She had a warmth about her, the kind that made people feel noticed, even in a crowded room. She taught English at Maplewood High, where she decorated her classroom with worn paperbacks, handwritten quotes, and student art pinned proudly to the walls. She stayed after school for kids who needed help, and she was the type of teacher who remembered birthdays. Her husband, Michael Parker, was 35. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who could calculate your tax return in his head and would never forget to put gas in your car. As an accountant, his world was numbers, balance sheets, and predictability. People called him dependable. Emily once called him safe. They lived in a 2-story colonial home on Birchwood Lane, white siding, blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked softly in the evening breeze. They'd bought the house together just after their wedding. To friends and neighbors, it was a picture of stability. Morning coffee on the porch, weekend trips to the farmer's market, Sunday dinners with family. But perfection is a fragile thing, and sometimes the cracks aren't visible from the outside. Michael was a man of routines. He woke at 6:15 every morning, read the same business column over breakfast, and parked in the exact same space at work. Emily loved him for his steadiness in the beginning, but over time that steadiness began to feel like stillness, and then like stagnation. She began to feel as though life was happening in the next room, and she was stuck on the wrong side of the door. It was around this time that Michael's younger brother, Ryan, came back to Maplewood. Ryan was 33. Where Michael's life was orderly, Ryan's was a collage of impulsive decisions and half-finished ventures. He had been a bartender in Nashville, a construction worker in Austin, a stand-up comic in Denver. He carried the smell of cigarette smoke on his jackets and the kind of easy charm that made people want to hear what he'd say next. He had stories, wild ones, and he told them like he'd been born to. Emily met Ryan again, really met him at a family barbecue that spring. She remembered him from years ago when she and Michael first started dating, but he had been younger then, less confident. Now he was magnetic. She laughed at one of his stories, not because it was funny though it was, but because of the way he told it. Ryan noticed, and Michael noticed too. It was subtle at first, a little more eye contact than necessary, a touch lingering half a second too long when he passed her a plate. But in small towns, subtle doesn't stay hidden for long. That night after the barbecue, Emily sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through her phone. Michael asked her what she was smiling at. She told him it was just a funny post from a friend. It wasn't. It was a message from Ryan, thanking her for laughing at his joke. She didn't reply not yet, but the message stayed in her mind, playing over and over. Looking back, it's hard to say if that was the first crack, but it was certainly the first one she noticed. Over the weeks that followed, family gatherings became something Emily looked forward to in a different way. Ryan was unpredictable. Sometimes he was there, sometimes not. And when he was, his attention could make the air in the room feel heavier. Michael, ever the steady one, didn't see it yet. Or maybe he did, but chose not to. But the people around them were starting to sense something. A cousin recalled later that there was an energy between Emily and Ryan that wasn't there before. At the time, they dismissed it. Small towns are full of harmless flirtations, after all. No one could have known then that this was the beginning of a story Maplewood would never forget. It began as a trickle. A short message here. A passing compliment there. Emily and Ryan's first real exchange outside the family gatherings came in the form of a simple text. Ryan had somehow found her number, maybe through Michael's phone, maybe from a family contact, and sent her a photo of an old board game they'd all played together years ago at a family holiday. The caption read, "Found this in Mom's attic. Remember how you kept beating me? Still think you cheated." It was lighthearted, innocent on the surface. But Emily remembered laughing for real, alone in her classroom when she saw it. She typed a reply, then erased it. Typed again. This time she hit send. Over the next few weeks, their messages came more often. A shared joke about a neighbor. A complaint about the town's terrible pizza. Then, gradually, the tone shifted. He started telling her about his restless nights, the things he missed from the places he'd lived, the regrets he carried. She found herself telling him about her own frustrations, not in the dramatic way you might tell a close friend, but in the quiet confessions that slip out when someone feels like they're really listening. Ryan listened, and more importantly, he seemed to understand. They met in public at first, a coffee shop on the edge of town, a park where they could walk without running into too many familiar faces. At these early meetings, the air between them seemed charged. They didn't touch, not yet, but every conversation lingered longer than it should have. One rainy Thursday evening, that changed. Emily had stayed late at school grading essays. The rain was coming down in steady sheets, and when she saw Ryan's name flash on her phone, she answered without thinking. He offered to drive her home. She agreed. But instead of turning onto Birchwood Lane, Ryan kept driving. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as they passed the gas station, the last streetlight, and then the town's edge. Emily knew where they were headed before the motel's flickering neon sign came into view. They sat in the parked car for a moment. Neither spoke. The rain drummed against the roof. Ryan's hand hovered over the gear shift, like he was giving her a chance to stop him. She didn't. That night, the line between temptation and betrayal was crossed. And once crossed, it became easier to do again. From then on, their meetings were deliberate. They paid in cash. They parked behind the building where the security cameras didn't reach. They deleted messages and used vague language. They avoided obvious places in town. But even the most careful people can't hide everything. Michael noticed the changes. Emily's phone was always within reach. She'd tilt the screen away from him when she read a message. She seemed distracted during dinner, sometimes smiling faintly at nothing. One night he asked her directly if there was someone else. She laughed and said no, her voice steady, her eyes on her plate. Michael didn't press her, but inside a seed of suspicion began to grow. Friends began to notice too. One described Emily as lighter, almost glowing, as if she were carrying some private joy. But in hindsight, it wasn't joy at all. It was the rush of a secret she thought she could control. And Ryan, he wasn't just a participant. He was feeding the flame. He told her things Michael never had, that she was exciting, unpredictable, worth chasing. He painted pictures of a life outside Maplewood, one where they could start over without the weight of the past. But underneath his charm was a restlessness that never stayed buried for long. And in time, that restlessness would turn dangerous. Because for Ryan, the thrill was in the chase. And for Emily, the danger was part of the attraction. April 2nd, 2023, began as an ordinary Sunday in Maplewood. The sky was pale gray, with a thin mist clinging to the rooftops. It was the kind of morning where you could almost feel the quiet, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Michael Parker woke at exactly 6:15 a.m., just like he always did. He brewed coffee in the kitchen, the scent of it drifting through the house. Emily joined him a few minutes later. She was dressed for work, a crisp blouse, hair pinned back, makeup neatly done. She told him she had an early meeting at the school to prepare for an upcoming parent conference week. Michael nodded, half listening, as he scrolled through news headlines on his phone. Later, he would remember thinking she looked distant that morning. Polite, but somewhere else in her head. At 7:30, Michael left for the office. Emily lingered a little longer before locking the front door and getting into her car. Security footage from Maplewood High School captured her vehicle pulling into the staff parking lot at 8:15. It was a still shot, no audio, just the grainy image of her car easing into a space. What's missing from that footage is any image of Emily getting out of the car. Somewhere between turning off the ignition and stepping into the building, she vanished. Michael told police that he spent the entire morning at work, reviewing quarterly reports. But his phone records later showed that between 2 o'clock and 2:30 p.m., his device pinged off a cell tower near Clearwater Creek, more than 6 miles from his office. When detectives asked him about this, Michael claimed he had left briefly to pick up lunch and take a short drive to clear his head. He said he wasn't aware the creek was nearby. Ryan said he'd slept in late that day, waking up sometime after noon. He claimed he spent the afternoon watching old boxing matches on his laptop, but there were no digital records, no streaming logs, no texts, no calls from his phone between 11:48 a.m. and nearly 6 p.m. That gap was unusual for Ryan, who typically sent dozens of messages a day. When questioned about the missing data, Ryan said he must have misplaced his phone or left it charging in another room. A neighbor down the block told police she saw Emily's car pulling out of the school parking lot around 8:30 a.m., just 15 minutes after it arrived. She wasn't certain, but she believed there was a man in the passenger seat. When asked to describe him, she hesitated. Could have been Michael or Ryan, maybe neither. I didn't get a good look. By noon, Michael had called Emily twice with no answer. By 3 p.m., his calls had grown more frequent. He phoned the school, expecting to hear she was still in a meeting, only to be told she hadn't been there all day. Panic began to set in. At 4:15 p.m., Michael reported her missing to Maplewood police. Officers were dispatched to the school parking lot. Emily's car was still there, locked. Her purse and phone were not inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no discarded belongings. The lot's security cameras positioned only at the entrance showed no record of her car leaving. It was as if she'd driven to the school and simply dissolved into thin air. Over the next 48 hours, detectives canvassed the area, speaking with school staff, parents, and anyone who might have seen her that morning. Her colleagues were stunned. Emily wouldn't just disappear, one teacher said. She was dependable. She had plans for the week. But there was one other common observation among those who knew her well in the weeks before she vanished. Emily had seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. For now, police kept their theories to themselves. What no one knew then was that the next time anyone saw Emily, it would be in a place no one expected and far too late to save her. By the third day of Emily's disappearance, Maplewood no longer felt like Maplewood. The quiet streets, usually lined with children on bikes and neighbors trimming hedges, were replaced with police cruisers rolling slowly through intersections, officers knocking on doors, and volunteers stapling missing posters to telephone poles. Emily's face was everywhere. The same warm smile, the same brown hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Underneath the photo were bold black letters. Missing last seen April 2nd, 2023. Local businesses printed stacks of flyers and left them by their registers. The grocery store kept a stack at every checkout lane. The high school where Emily taught organized search parties, splitting into groups to cover wooded trails, back roads, and fields. Michael joined the early searches, walking alongside volunteers with a flashlight in hand, even in broad daylight. He wore the same clothes for days at a time, his voice hoarse from calling her name. Ryan, too, was seen at a few of the search events, but his appearances were brief. He often arrived late, left early, and avoided standing too close to Michael. More than one person noticed the tension between the two men. Family members tried to maintain hope, but the unspoken truth was already setting in. In cases like this, time is never on your side. On the sixth day of the search, police received a tip from a hiker who claimed to have seen a man loitering near Clearwater Creek with a large duffel bag. The man was described as unkempt, mid-40s, with a noticeable limp. Officers canvassed the area and eventually found him a homeless veteran named Carl, who had been camping near the creek for weeks. Carl told police he had never seen Emily and that his bag contained only clothing and food. A search confirmed his story. He was released, but not before whispers started spreading through town that maybe Emily had crossed paths with someone dangerous that morning. That lead went nowhere. As days turned into weeks, the town's optimism thinned. The posters began to curl at the edges from rain. Volunteers stopped showing up in the same numbers. In small towns, grief often turns into suspicion. Neighbors who once waved to each other now watched from behind curtains. Questions began to circulate in hushed voices. Why hadn't Michael been able to reach her? Why was Ryan's name coming up more often than anyone else's? Police kept most of their findings close to the vest. They did confirm that Emily's phone had been active until 9:02 a.m. on the day she disappeared, pinging from an area 2 miles west of the school. After that, it went dark. 2 weeks in, police organized a second, more targeted search around the creek areas and wooded trails outside town. They brought in cadaver dogs, search and rescue teams, and drones equipped with heat sensors. The search was methodical, grids marked out. Every area walked twice, but nothing was found. For Michael, each day without news felt like a cruel extension of the same nightmare. For Ryan, the lack of evidence meant he could maintain the same story that he hadn't seen Emily since the day before she vanished. But the truth had a way of catching up, and on June 2nd, 2023, it did. It was a Friday afternoon when a man walking his dog along Clearwater Creek spotted something in the water, a tangle of fabric caught in the reeds. At first, he thought it was just debris from the last storm, but as he got closer, the shape became horrifyingly clear. The body was partially submerged, the current moving gently around it. She was clothed in the same outfit she had worn the day she disappeared. Police sealed off the area immediately. The medical examiner was called. The scene was treated as a homicide from the start. What the autopsy would reveal in the coming days would only deepen the darkness surrounding the case and narrow the focus of the investigation to two men brothers bound by blood and now by suspicion. June 2nd, 2023. It had been 61 days since Emily Parker vanished. The discovery came just after 4 p.m. when a local man named David Miller was walking his German Shepherd along the western bank of Clearwater Creek. The trail there was narrow, hemmed in by overgrown bushes and a canopy of trees that made the air feel heavy. David noticed something in the water ahead, a pale shape snagged in the reeds. At first, he thought it was a large piece of fabric, maybe a tarp washed down from upstream after the spring storms. But as he got closer, the details sharpened. A sleeve, a shoulder, hair moving with the current. He froze. His dog barked once, then went silent. David stepped back, pulled out his phone, and called 911. His voice shook as he gave the location. When police arrived, they quickly secured the area with yellow tape, keeping the small crowd of curious onlookers back. Officers and waiters entered the shallow water, careful not to disturb the surrounding vegetation. The body was partially submerged, tangled in a bed of reeds just a few feet from the shore. The current had slowed her drift, holding her there like some grim offering. Even after 60 days, the clothing was recognizable, the light blue blouse and black slacks she'd worn on the morning she vanished. There were no shoes. The recovery team worked methodically, lifting her onto a stretcher covered in clean plastic, securing the remains for transport to the medical examiner's office. Cameras flashed from the crime scene unit. Every angle was documented. To the untrained eye, the cause of death wasn't immediately clear. There were no visible bullet wounds, no signs of massive external bleeding. But one of the detectives at the scene, a veteran named Detective Harris, noticed a deep indentation at the left side of the skull. The body was cold, waterlogged. The face was partially obscured by silt and algae, but there was no mistaking who she was. Word spread quickly through Maplewood. By nightfall, candles and flowers had been placed at the school where Emily taught. The medical examiner's report, completed over the following days, revealed the truth. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the left temporal skull. Estimated time of death: April 2nd, between 2 o'clock and 3 p.m. The wound was consistent with being struck by a heavy, narrow object, possibly a tire iron or crowbar. The force of the blow had been enough to cause immediate unconsciousness, followed quickly by death. There were no defensive wounds on Emily's hands or arms. She hadn't fought back. That told investigators one of two things. Either she hadn't seen the attack coming, or she'd trusted the person standing close enough to kill her. Soil samples taken from her clothing matched the muddy banks of Clearwater Creek exactly, confirming she had been killed there rather than moved from somewhere else. Fibers were also recovered, dark synthetic strands consistent with automotive carpeting. Investigators believe she had been transported in the trunk or backseat of a vehicle before being left in the water. And then there was the absence of something important, her phone and purse. Both were missing, and neither was found in subsequent searches of the creek or surrounding woods. By the time the autopsy was complete, investigators had quietly ruled out the drifter who'd been questioned weeks earlier. Attention turned back to the two men who had been under the shadow of suspicion from the start. Michael Parker, the husband whose phone had pinged near the creek at the exact time of death, and Ryan Parker, the brother whose phone had gone dark for 6 crucial hours that same day. Two men connected not just by blood, but by their relationship to Emily. And investigators were about to find that the web of lies between the three of them was far more tangled than anyone in Maplewood had imagined. From the moment Emily's body was recovered, the Maplewood Police Department shifted into overdrive. This was no longer a missing person case, it was a homicide investigation. Detectives split into 2 teams. One would recanvass potential witnesses, looking for anything missed in April. The other would focus on the people who knew Emily best, starting with the 2 men whose names had been whispered since the day she vanished. Michael sat in the small, windowless interview room, his suit rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. Detectives began with routine questions. When he last saw Emily, whether she'd been acting strangely, if they'd argued. He answered quietly, his voice flat. He said their marriage had been going through a rough patch, but insisted there was nothing unusual about the morning she disappeared. When asked about his phone pinging near Clearwater Creek on April 2nd, the exact time of Emily's death, Michael hesitated. He explained he had left work to get some fresh air and had driven around aimlessly. He claimed he didn't realize the creek was near the route he took. Detectives didn't believe him, but they didn't challenge him directly, not yet. Instead, they let the silence stretch, watching him fidget. In the observation room, one detective noted, "That's not a man telling us everything." Ryan's interview was different. He walked in with a kind of defensive confidence, leaning back in the chair, his arms crossed. He admitted to having an affair with Emily, something he'd denied publicly until now, but claimed it had ended the night before she disappeared. When asked about his whereabouts on April 2nd, Ryan said he slept late and watched old fights on his laptop at home. But when pressed for details, he couldn't name which fights or even which streaming service he used. The gap in his phone's location data from 11:48 a.m. to nearly 6 p.m. was harder to explain. He shrugged it off, saying he must have left it on the charger in another room. But detectives knew that in many cases, a deliberate shutoff of GPS tracking is a red flag, the kind of move people make when they don't want their movements known. A week into the homicide investigation, an anonymous caller claimed that a male colleague at the high school had been too interested in Emily and had argued with her a month before she disappeared. Detectives brought the coworker in, a man named Robert Lane. He was cooperative, admitting that they'd once had lunch together, but denying anything romantic. His alibi for April 2nd being at a teacher training seminar in Columbus checked out. Phone records, hotel logs, and multiple witnesses confirmed it. The tip had been a dead end, but it drained valuable time and resources. While interviews continued, the forensic team dug deeper. The dark synthetic fibers found on Emily's clothing were sent to a state lab for comparison. The results came back matching the carpeting used in the trunk of a 2009 Ford Fusion. Ryan drove a 2009 Ford Fusion. At the same time, analysts worked on the GPS data. Even though Ryan's phone had been off for hours, his car's built-in navigation system had stored recent trips. The logs showed a route taken on April 2nd, one that passed near the school, then out toward Clearwater Creek before returning to his apartment. That route, along with the fiber match, began to solidify the case against him. Detectives decided to conduct second interviews with both brothers. Michael repeated his story almost word for word, a sign he'd rehearsed it. Ryan, however, began to falter. He stuck to his claim of staying home, but when confronted with the vehicle navigation logs, his demeanor changed. He leaned forward, his voice lowering, as if trying to control the conversation. Still, he denied everything. Without direct evidence placing him at the scene, police couldn't yet make an arrest. That was about to change. The break they needed was already out there in the memory of a man who had driven past Clearwater Creek on April 2nd. It was a memory he hadn't realized was important until he saw Emily Parker's face on the news. The first witness came forward almost by accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a few weeks after Emily's body had been found, when Detective Harris received a call from a grocery delivery driver named Thomas Grady. Thomas had seen the story on the news. As he watched Emily's smiling face flash on the screen, something clicked. The day she went missing, Thomas had been making his usual deliveries in the area near Clearwater Creek. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now, after hearing the details of her disappearance, he remembered something. Around 2 p.m. that day, Thomas had been driving his usual route, pulling into a mobile home park just off the main road. As he parked, he'd noticed a woman walking alone down the roadside, barefoot, disheveled, looking around nervously. Thomas didn't think much of it. He'd seen people walking before, especially with the creek nearby. But what caught his attention was the car that pulled over beside her. A dark sedan with tinted windows stopped sharply. The man inside was young, around 30, and had a look about him that made Thomas uneasy. The man stepped out of the vehicle, grabbed the woman by the arm, and forcefully pushed her into the backseat of the car. It all happened so quickly Thomas didn't even have time to react. But something about the situation felt wrong. As Thomas watched the car pull away, he couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, full of fear, and the man's unflinching grip. A few days later, after seeing Emily's picture on the news, it hit him. He hadn't recognized her at the time, but now, with the details laid out, he was certain. The woman he had seen being forced into the car was Emily Parker. He immediately contacted police, and the investigation team brought him in for a full statement. Thomas described the incident with startling clarity. He even remembered the car's license plate partially at least. He hadn't seen the whole thing, but the first 3 digits were burned into his memory. 7 AD. It wasn't much, but it was something. Detectives matched Thomas's sighting to the GPS data from Ryan's vehicle. On April 2nd, his car had been in that same area at around 2:15 p.m., just moments after the delivery driver had seen the exchange. The GPS logs showed Ryan's car heading straight toward Clearwater Creek, then veering off the main road and toward the mobile home park. But it didn't stop there. Forensic investigators recovered more fibers from the passenger side of Ryan's car, the same dark synthetic fibers found on Emily's clothing. The fibers were matched to the car's upholstery, strengthening the case against him. The evidence was stacking up: fibers, GPS logs, a witness, and yet Ryan still refused to crack. Detective Harris called Ryan in for a third interview. Ryan was calm at first, but as the evidence piled up the fibers, the GPS, the witness' demeanor began to shift. His posture slumped. His confident smirk faded into something colder, more guarded. "Ryan, we have you near Clearwater Creek at the time of Emily's death. We have a witness who saw you force her into your car, and we have fibers matching those on her clothes in your car. You can keep denying this, but you know we're getting closer to the truth," said Detective Harris. Ryan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. For a long while, the room was silent. Harris pushed forward. "Did you really think you could get away with this? You've left a trail that's led straight to you. The fibers, the phone logs, the witness, it all lines up. All you need to do is tell us what happened." Detective Harris quizzed. Ryan shifted in his seat. His hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles went white, but he remained silent. For the next few hours, the tension in the room thickened. Detective Harris knew this was the moment, the final tipping point. "Ryan, this is your last chance. We can keep going in circles, or you can tell us what happened." "Did you kill Emily?" Harris quizzed further. Ryan finally broke his silence. His voice came out in a hushed, strained whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. She She was leaving. She was going back to Michael. I didn't know what else to do. I lost control. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Ryan's confession unraveled in fragments. He admitted that Emily had shown up at his apartment on April 2nd. After a series of phone calls and texts between the two, she had told him she was ending the affair. She was going back to Michael. But Ryan wasn't ready to let go. He tried to convince her to stay. He told her they could leave together, start fresh somewhere else. When she refused, he snapped. In a fit of rage, Ryan had struck her in the head with a heavy metal object he kept in the trunk of his car. One blow, then another. The blow that ended her life came swiftly. He realized what he'd done only after she fell unconscious. Panicked, he drove her body to Clearwater Creek, intending to leave her there, thinking she'd never be found. The moment he placed her body in the water, he knew he couldn't undo what he had done. By the end of the night, Ryan Parker was arrested. The evidence had all but sealed his fate. The forensic evidence, the witness, the confession, it was a clear case of murder. But for Maplewood, the arrest was just the beginning of another kind of mourning. The community was shaken not just by Emily's death, but by the fact that it had been someone so close a brother, a family member who had taken her life. By the time Ryan Parker was arrested, Maplewood had already been through months of turmoil. The search for Emily had been long, the mystery of her disappearance nagging at the town's quiet rhythms. Then came the discovery of her body cold, lifeless, floating in the creek. And finally, the confession. But even with the truth now out, there was still one final chapter to unfold: the trial. The trial of Ryan Parker began in early November 2024, 8 months after Emily's body was discovered. The courthouse was packed, not just with reporters, but with people who had known Emily, Michael, and Ryan, people who still couldn't wrap their heads around the betrayal. Michael Parker sat in the front row of the courtroom, his face pale and strained. He wore a dark suit, his tie slightly askew, like he'd dressed without care. The weight of everything he had lost was evident in his slumped posture, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of sleepless nights. Ryan, sitting across the courtroom, was a stark contrast. He was dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to his waist. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders hunched, as if he were trying to make himself smaller. It was clear from the beginning that this trial would not only be about facts and evidence, but about emotions, raw, unfiltered emotions. The town had lost one of its own, and they wanted justice. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Karen Fields, a woman known for her calm but determined presence. She opened her statement with a quiet strength that echoed through the courtroom. Emily Parker was a teacher. She was a daughter, a wife, and a friend to many. She had a future that was brutally taken from her by the man who should have loved her most. The evidence in this case is irrefutable. Ryan Parker murdered his brother's wife, and no matter how many lies he tells, no matter how many times he tries to shift the blame, the truth is clear. Emily's life was taken by the person who should have protected her, and for that, he must face justice. The defense, led by attorney David Thomas, was equally resolute, though his tone was calmer, more measured. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what happened on April 2nd was not premeditated. It was an act of passion, a moment of complete loss of control. Yes, my client admits to the affair. Yes, he admits to the altercation that led to Emily's death. But he did not set out that morning with the intent to kill. This was a tragic accident, a tragedy that has torn his life apart as much as it has destroyed the Parker family, David said. The trial was a drawn-out affair with several key witnesses called to the stand. Detective Harris testified first, explaining how the GPS data, forensic fibers, and witness accounts had all pointed toward Ryan as the prime suspect. The fibers found in his car matched those on Emily's clothes, and the GPS logs confirmed his route to the creek that day. Thomas Grady, the grocery delivery driver, took the stand next. His testimony was delivered quietly, but it carried weight. He recounted seeing a woman matching Emily's description walking along the road, barefoot, before being forced into Ryan's car. The jury could see the strain in his eyes as he was clearly disturbed by what he had witnessed. Then came the heartbreaking testimony of Michael Parker. Michael spoke slowly, his voice shaking at times. He talked about his love for Emily, about their life together, and how her disappearance had devastated him. But when asked about the moment he found out that Ryan was having an affair with his wife, his eyes filled with tears. I couldn't believe it. Ryan was my brother, my best friend. I trusted him, and then to find out that he had been with her, it destroyed me. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought I'd be sitting here in a courtroom watching my brother be held accountable for her death. Michael's voice broke as he spoke, and the courtroom fell into an almost uncomfortable silence. Ryan was called to the stand by his defense attorney. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs around his wrists. The once charismatic man was now a broken figure, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "Ryan, can you tell the jury what happened on April 2nd?" David asked. Ryan took a long breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear I didn't. She was leaving me. She was going back to Michael. I couldn't let her go. I didn't know what to do." The courtroom was tense as Ryan continued to speak. His words were fractured, his emotions raw. He admitted to striking Emily, though he said it was an accident, a moment of blind rage. "I didn't think it would go that far. I didn't want to hurt her. I loved her. I thought if I could just convince her to stay, we could run away together. But when she told me she was going back to Michael, I lost control. I hit her. She fell. She didn't get up. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." After days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 6 hours. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming: fibers, GPS, witness accounts, Ryan's own confession. When the verdict came down, it was clear. Ryan Parker was guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was handed down swiftly. 28 years in prison. Ryan sat motionless as the judge spoke. His face showed no emotion. Michael Parker, having lived through the pain of betrayal and loss, was left to pick up the pieces of his life. He moved away from Maplewood shortly after the trial, seeking a fresh start in a different town. His face never appeared in the news again. Some say he would never fully forgive Ryan, and some say he would never fully forgive himself. As for Ryan, he now sits in prison, his days spent in solitary reflection, haunted by his actions. In the end, the people of Maplewood would remember Emily not for the tragedy that befell her, but for the life she had lived before the darkness crept in. Her smile, her kindness, her dedication, all of it would live on in the hearts of those who loved her. But for Michael and Ryan, the bond of brotherhood was forever broken, lost to a single, fatal decision.